So out of this Bleeding Kansas debate comes this guy named John Brown. And John Brown was not somebody that you could either take him or leave him. He was a very polarizing figure. So you loved him or you hated him. If you were a pro-slave man, you hated him. If you were an anti-slavery man, it depended on how radical you liked your abolitionism. So John Brown believed he was chosen by God. He believed he was called to do the Lord's work by smiting evildoers, and the worst of all evildoers were slaveholders and pro-slavery men. He apparently, though, did not believe that it was his job to pay his debts, because he was hunted by creditors across several different states. He was tracked down to try to get money out of him that he owed. He had a murderous hand. The Potawatomi Massacre, which I'll mention here in just a minute, was by far one of the worst, if not the worst, assaults by John Brown and his boys during this whole thing. He had a fierce devotion to his cause. Nobody could say that he was not devoted to the cause of anti-slavery. So, I mean, John Brown, the debate goes on. Was he a saint? Was he a sinner? He was a guy that was transplanted from the east to Kansas. He was intellectually and radically opposed to slavery, and that's going to win him the support of a lot of Yankee abolitionists, but it's his actions and what he does with that opposition that's going to lose him a lot of that support as well. So the Potawatomi Massacre is this night of bloodshed in which John Brown and his boys take it upon themselves to inflict their own kind of justice on pro-slavery men. Now, they go to a man's cabin along Potawatomi Creek in Kansas, and he's a pro-slavery man. He did not actually own any slaves, but he was not opposed to slavery. And he and his sons, save one who his wife pleaded for, were marched out and then had their skulls split open with broadswords. So that was what Brown considered doing the Lord's work in this wicked land. Now, he's going to take that same level of violence, and it's going to be glorified. I mean, this is from inside the Capitol building in Kansas. And here is John Brown portrayed like Moses with a Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other, and he is holding the forces of evil at bay. He's holding the Confederates at bay. Meanwhile, on the Union, you've got Progress marching on, and so this is their image of John Brown. Now, Harper's Ferry, he's going to take his whole operation east. He's going to get out of Kansas and go where more action is, because he's got this grand plan. He is going to start a slave rebellion in the South. He is going to encourage slaves to rise up and burn the master's house down. And he's convinced with one massive show-stopping act that he can cause this revolt to start taking place. Now, he's going into very dangerous territory here, because there was a rebellion, a well-known rebellion in the South, Nat Turner's rebellion, in which a lot of fear was struck into the hearts of white Southerners, because Turner's rebellion was actually very, very successful in the short amount of time that it took to actually carry out the violent acts that they did. And that's something that we won't really talk about too much in here. But if you're interested in that kind of story, definitely go check out Nat Turner's Rebellion, because it is a very heart-stopping kind of story to put yourself in that place on either side. So Harper's Ferry in Virginia here was the home of a musket factory, an armory, and you can see it on the map here along the Potomac. And here's a shot of Harper's Ferry. So what Brown's plan is to march in with his small band of troops, and they numbered no more than 20 really, and he's going to take the arsenal, and meanwhile Meanwhile, slaves on plantations around the area are going to rise up and kill their masters and start this huge slave revolt. So it's a pretty grand plan, John Brown, and it really doesn't go off too well because they can't get any support. Nobody shows up. He's assembling weapons and expecting all of these slaves to flee their plantations and come help him, and they don't. He has very few people actually show up to assist him in this, and so he is trapped inside the armory, and he is eventually surrounded and forced out, and he is hanged for his crimes. And Yankee abolitionists, a lot of the transcendentalists like Thoreau and Emerson, they came out in support of John Brown. And Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of the Scarlet Letter, and the relative of one of the judges on the Salem Witch Trials Court, was a little more skeptical as to doing things in the name of God, and he had good reason for that. And he said that no man was more justly hanged. So there was his voice out of that abolitionist cabal there. All right, and here you can see two different representations of John Brown. You can see the warrior on the left there, portrayed by Kansas and seen at really a lot of KU games. And on the right, you can see the father figure, the savior of the black race. And you can see this black woman with her child raising it up. And so John Brown can kiss it, and them being marched out to his death. So, yeah, he was really, really out there, very, very devoted, and a huge figure in the start of the war. Okay, so the last major piece of the puzzle here is Lincoln himself. Now, Lincoln starts off politics in Illinois. He's elected to the state Congress, legislature, and then he is eventually in 1846 elected to the U.S. Congress as a Whig. Now, his early views on slavery represent the character of the time. So, Lincoln was not a racist, but Lincoln was living in a society that is very different from modern society. In modern society, it is considered very incorrect to even have these thoughts about separating people into races or even genders. That was not the case in the 1840s and 50s and 60s in the antebellum period. And so Lincoln's views on slavery were a little different than some people expect because they think of him as the great emancipator. But yeah, he was opposed to slavery's expansion, definitely. He did believe in gradual emancipation. He also believed in colonization. He believed that whites and blacks could not peacefully coexist together. And, you know, for all that we know about Lincoln, we discover that there's so much more that we do not know about Lincoln. And so his views, because he's so moderate in a lot of things, it's going to put him at odds with both parties. So he can't go with the Democrats or the pro-slavery men because he is for emancipation, but he really can't go with a lot of the more radical abolitionist-leaning politicians because he believed in gradual emancipation and not sudden. And so he's also got contradictory views on the issue, which also represent the attitude of a lot of Americans at the time. He says early on, that slavery should not be expanded, but left untouched where it exists. Then he says that slavery must be cut out like a cancer. And then he passes the Emancipation Proclamation where he has the chance to free all slaves, but he only frees them in the 11 official Confederate states. So the question then comes up, did Lincoln really free any slaves, or did they pretty much free themselves? Because, they could walk out of there if the Union Army had arrived, so maybe the Union Army should get credit for freeing the slaves. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of gray area in there, and that's why historians write so much about the Civil War, because there are so many different avenues and aspects that you can look at, and that's true with a lot of history. Okay, going back to Stephen Douglas, revisiting the one of the authors of the Compromise of 1850 and supporter of popular sovereignty. Stephen Douglas and President Lincoln, or what would become President Lincoln, were running for election in 1860, and they engage in this speaking tour. The Douglas Lincoln Douglas debates is what it's called, and we went through these. These are from each speech. These are the word clouds. The words that were mentioned most often are larger than other words, and we talked about some of the things that they discussed and the things that they could have mean. And you can see that slavery is a big one in there, but Constitution is also fairly large in there, and so the states and states' rights appear. Okay, then just kind of a side note here with politics, just to show you that America was not always so it's got to be Democrat or it's got to be Republican. We've got some interesting parties spring up in the antebellum period. You got a lot more diverse parties than today. You can choose from Democrats and Whigs, and in 1860 you can choose from Republicans. You can choose from Bentonites and anti-Bentonites, and the anti-Masonic Party and the Know-Nothings, which are one of the most interesting groups, I think. They're going to come out of the Whig Party, and remember the Whigs, that started early on, and Henry Clay usually ran as a Whig, and when slavery becomes a big issue, it's going to split the party, and it's going to be pro and anti. And most of these guys are nativists, meaning that they hate a few things, including the Irish, the Germans, the Catholics, and the blacks. So basically, Native Americans, and that's what the flag, Americans beware of foreign influence. So when I say Native Americans in this sense, I don't necessarily mean what Columbus mislabeled the Indians, but people that were born in America were to be valued, and foreigners were not to be trusted. And so they had actually a lot of success during their time in politics. So 1860, here we go. Harper's Ferry happens, and the Republican Party is going to start to be known as the Abolitionist Party. Now, that was not always the case in every state. In Missouri, the Republican Party slogan was white men for Missouri and Missouri for white men. So every state did not necessarily go along with that, but overall the party became known as an abolitionist party. Many Democrats are going to side with slaveholders, and again, that's not a perfect every single time case, but it's a good generalization. So we already said we've got Lincoln and Douglas. Lincoln's a very moderate Republican, and so it's going to help him win in a landslide, because even though he's at odds with politicians, he fits in well with the American public. Douglas is only going to win the state of Missouri. So, and then Lincoln wins, the South is fed up. So 1860, we looked at kind of the voting results, and then we compared that to population density. We can see that the more populated North voted for Lincoln than the less populated South. And we can see how Douglas and Breckinridge and Bell all split the voting choice and helped Lincoln win. All right, so after Lincoln is elected, 4 days after, South Carolina votes to secede, and then 10 states are going to follow. So that's going to become the 11 official states of the Confederacy. In 1861, Jefferson Davis is going to become the president, and they're going to secede under Buchanan's lame duck period, because the president can't really do anything to stop him, because he's waiting until he just leaves office and the new president actually steps in. And they try some things like the Crittenden Amendments, which are going to fail. And we looked at some of the basis of secession. They felt like there was nothing in the Constitution that said they couldn't. States' rights, they were fearful and angry about Northern interference. They had a historical precedent. They had separated from England in the Revolution, and there was this big feeling of nationalism worldwide. And again, keep in mind that the Civil War is not all black and white. So not all Southerners want secession, like West Virginia, which forms in 1861, and not all Northerners wanted war. But we are going to stop here at Fort Sumter, and this is going to be the opening shots of the Civil War.